I was about to lose everything: my company, my family, even my name. What started as a board meeting turned into the most elegant betrayal I've ever witnessed. But what they didn't know is that I had one last truth left to play, and this is only the beginning. My name is Margaret Hale, and what you're about to hear are the echoes of a life divided between love, loss, and truth. If my story touched you, stay close. Subscribe and walk with me through every chapter. The room smelled faintly of polished oak and paper, that quiet scent of permanence I had always loved. But that morning, even the air felt hesitant, like it wasn't sure it should stay. I remember the light trembling against the glass panes, the way it would when Robert and I used to arrive early for board meetings, laughing at how the city outside still yawned while we were already chasing the day. Now, there was no laughter. Only the sharp tick of the clock above the door, each second falling like a small hammer on my heart. Daniel sat to my right, tall and composed, his jaw tight in that way he inherited from his father. I used to think that look meant determination. Today I realized it also meant distance. Across from me, Nora adjusted her blazer, smoothing non-existent wrinkles. Every movement of hers was deliberate, a dance choreographed for control. The burgundy of her nails caught the light, gleaming like small cuts on the surface of the table. She smiled politely, but her eyes didn't smile with her. When the love you raise grows tall enough to look down at you, I thought, the view changes for both of you. Mother, Daniel began, clearing his throat. His voice was calm, too calm, like a script rehearsed in front of a mirror. We've been reviewing the company's structure, and we think it's time for a new phase. Something more forward-thinking. Forward-thinking. How many betrayals have worn that name? I clasped my hands together, feeling the cool gold of my wedding ring against my skin. The same ring Robert gave me in a small chapel 43 years ago, when all we owned was a shared vision and 2 sets of calloused hands. We had built this company from letters written at our kitchen table, from sleepless nights and coffee-stained ledgers. He used to say, "Margaret, every signature is a seed. Plant carefully." Now my son was asking me to sign the very document that would uproot it all. Nora leaned forward, her perfume subtle but sharp, lilies and smoke. We believe it's time to professionalize the leadership structure, make it less dependent on family decisions and more attractive to outside investors. She said, family, the way people say old furniture. Something to be replaced, polished over, or stored away. I glanced at Daniel. He didn't look at me. He looked at the pen. The pen was heavy, gold-tipped, engraved with Robert's initials. It used to rest on his desk, my small inheritance of meaning. Now, it sat between us like a loaded weapon no one wanted to claim. "What kind of changes?" I asked. Daniel shifted in his seat. "Mainly, clarifying roles. You'd stay as honorary president, of course, but the board would have a balanced vote. It's a safeguard, standard procedure." Safeguard. I had learned long ago that such words are shields people hide behind when they're afraid of looking you in the eye. And who drafted this? Legal, Nora replied smoothly. With a few adjustments, I recommended. It's all for efficiency. Efficiency, another word that drains the color from things. I looked down at the paper. A single clause, printed in black, removing my deciding vote. A sentence so small it could fit inside a breath, and yet it could erase decades. For a moment, I saw Robert's face in the reflection of the glass wall behind them. Or maybe it was my own reflection, tired, composed, holding herself together because that's what widows do. "I see," I said quietly. Nora smiled again, but her expression didn't reach her eyes. "It's only a formality. You'll always have our respect, Margaret." Respect. The currency people spend when they no longer owe you love. I traced the edge of the paper with my finger, feeling the fibers beneath. Paper is such a fragile thing to carry the weight of empires. My mind drifted for a moment to the day Robert and I opened our first office. We had 2 desks, 1 window, and 1 dream. When clients called, I would answer with his name. When they asked for the secretary, he'd hand me the phone and say, "She's not the secretary, she's the strategy." That memory should have made me smile. Instead, it hurt. Because now, my son sat where Robert once did, repeating words that were not his. I breathed in slowly. "And what happens if I don't sign?" Nora tilted her head. "Oh, I'm sure it won't come to that. The investors are already expecting the new structure." Investors. The word hung in the air like smoke. I hadn't approved any investor meetings. No proposals had crossed my desk. Yet they were already expecting. That could only mean one thing. Someone had gone behind my back. My heart beat once, heavy and deliberate, then again, slower. I kept my face still. Years of loss teach you the art of stillness. "I wasn't aware of any scheduled investors," I said. "Oh, they're very enthusiastic," Nora replied. "They see great potential in the brand once it's refreshed." Refreshed, as though the life I built had gone stale. Daniel leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Mother, this isn't about you. It's about the company's future. You've done incredible things, but the world has changed. We have to adapt." I met his gaze. My son, the boy who once carried my briefcase when it was too heavy, now speaking as if I were the weight he needed to drop. "And who brought them?" I asked again. Silence. The clock ticked. Once, twice. Then Nora smiled. Small, confident, unbothered. "We both did," she said. "Together. Together." The same word Robert and I once built our lives on. Now it sounded like a verdict. I felt something inside me shift, not break, not yet, but tilt just enough for everything to look different. The window behind them showed the city skyline, tall and glassy, a mirror of ambition. For a second, the reflection of the room merged with the buildings outside, and I saw myself standing between them, half inside the company I built, half outside of it, fading into the horizon. I took a deep breath. "If they're waiting," I said, "then I suppose I should meet them soon." Nora's eyes flickered with surprise. She hadn't expected compliance. Not this kind. "Of course," she said, her tone smoothing back into politeness. "They'll be delighted." I gathered the papers, aligning them neatly as if order could still exist in this small ritual. Daniel stood up, perhaps to signal the meeting's end. "We knew you'd understand." Understand. That word again. So gentle, so cruel. "I always do," I said softly. "I've been understanding all my life." He smiled, relieved, unaware that I wasn't agreeing, only observing. When they left, I remained seated. The echo of their footsteps lingered down the hallway, then vanished. For a long while, I didn't move. The pen still rested on the table, gleaming like a challenge. Through the window, clouds rolled over the city. The light dimmed, then brightened again, uncertain, like my faith in the day. I thought of Emma's voice reading from the Psalms last night. "The truth shall be your shield and buckler." Truth as shield. I smiled faintly. Maybe it was time to remember that. I rose slowly, walked to the window, and placed my palm against the cold glass. Below, the world carried on. Cars, people, noise. Up here, time had paused. I whispered to the city that could not hear me. "You can take a name off a door, but not out of a story." Behind me, the table waited. The same one where Robert and I once argued over budgets and dreams, where Daniel played with paperclips while we discussed expansion, where love and work once shared a chair. Now it was just wood and memory. But somewhere inside that silence, I felt something stir. Not rage, not revenge, but the old pulse of reason, the kind Robert loved in me. He used to say, "You never raise your voice, Margaret. You just raise the truth." The next time we sat at that table, I would do exactly that. For now, I gathered the papers and left them unsigned. The pen stayed where it was, between us. As I turned off the lights, the reflection in the window shifted again. For a brief moment, I could have sworn I saw Robert standing there. Or perhaps it was only the shape of my own resolve, taller than it had been an hour ago. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the ache of betrayal, I heard the faint whisper of clarity. Every fortress can be rebuilt, but sometimes it must first be breached, so the light can find its way in. The house had always known how to hold us. It kept our birthdays and our arguments in the same walls, like a loyal witness with a steady heartbeat. That night, though, the air was thinner. Even the hallway seemed to stand back from us, as if it didn't want to be caught in what was coming. Clara set the table with her usual care, a small ceremony of quiet devotion, linen napkins folded like white sails, the porcelain with the blue braid Robert loved, the candles that never drew attention to themselves yet made everything gentler. I could hear the soft hiss of the roast as she took it from the oven, the way the heat sighed when it touched the room. "Will there be 6 tonight?" she asked, still not quite meeting my eyes. "Just 5, I said. "Samuel had a church committee meeting." She nodded and went back to the kitchen. On the hallway console, someone had left a bowl of lemons from the garden. They were imperfect, scarred, a little misshapen, fragrant. Robert used to say that real life always smelled slightly like citrus, bright, honest, a little acidic. I touched one gently and felt its stubborn weight. The doorbell rang. Daniel entered first, stepping across the threshold like a man walking into a verdict he believed he'd already won. Nora followed, her smile composed, her eyes taking inventory of the room as if it were a report to be filed. Claire came last, soft-voiced and watchful, balancing a bottle of wine and a peace offering that looked like flowers but felt like a bandage. "Mother," Daniel said, kissing my cheek. He smelled like the city, wind and cologne and a day spent in rooms without windows. "Margaret," Nora added, as if the word were an equal sign. "Hi, Mum," Claire whispered, and her hug was the only thing that felt like home. We sat. The candles steadied their small flames. I passed the bread to Nora, who took a small piece and set it beside her plate, as if bread were something one kept in reserve. "To new chapters," Daniel said, lifting his glass. The words found me like cold water. "To truth," I replied, and took a sip. For a few minutes, we performed the ritual of normal families. How was your day? The traffic was terrible. Claire's team is presenting on Thursday. The roast is perfect. And then, as Isabel Allende once wrote, life decided to behave like a novel. It hurried toward the necessary conflict. Nora placed her napkin down with surgical precision. "Margaret, there's something we wanted to discuss with you, here at home, because it's respectful." Respectful wore a dress that night and sat with its back straight. Daniel cleared his throat. "We want to keep this loving, Mother. We all want the best for the company. But after talking with advisors, we believe a modern structure will protect what you and Dad built. You'd remain with a title that honors your place in our history." "History," I said. "Such a convenient place to put people when you want them quiet." He flinched. It was small, but it was there. Nora leaned forward, elbows barely touching the tablecloth. "The proposal is simple. You as honorary president, a board that decides by majority, independent chairs who understand the market. With your blessing, we can secure a faster path to growth." "Growth," I repeated. "That old gospel." "It's not a criticism," Nora added, gentle on the surface, steel beneath. "You've done miracles, but companies are organisms. They either evolve or stop breathing." Across the table, Claire's eyes flicked toward me, then down at her plate. She was the kind who could feel earthquakes before anyone else noticed the water in glasses trembling. "How strange," I said. "For something that's been breathing for decades, only to be diagnosed with asthma once investors start knocking." Nora smiled, as if I'd told a beautiful lie. "Investors knock when they see potential. We should open the door. Who invited them to knock? I asked, voice even. Silence took a seat beside us. The house drew a breath and held it. We did, Daniel said finally. Together. Together, an old key tried in a new lock, turning something it was never meant to open. Clara entered with the roast, and for a second we all pretended to be people again. She served quietly, efficiently, the way you place plates in front of strangers whose pain you're not invited to touch. When she left, Nora lifted her fork, then set it back down. "Margaret, may I speak plainly?" she asked. "This transition is happening. We want you beside us, not in front of us." "Beside," I echoed. "I know that seat. It's the one that comes without a vote." Daniel's jaw tightened, the same way Robert's used to when a client questioned his integrity. "Mother, please don't make this harder." "My love," I said, letting the words land where they used to belong. "Hardness comes from pressure. You brought the pressure." For a beat he looked 12 again, boyish and wounded. Then Nora's hand found his under the table, and the man returned, rational and distant. Claire spoke softly. "Maybe we should—" "No," Nora interrupted, turning to me with a new kind of warmth that made the room colder. "Let's be honest as a family. Margaret, you've carried this company alone for years. No one doubts your strength. But there comes a time when the legacy must move from memory to management." There it was, a sentence so tidy it could have been framed. "Legacy isn't a mausoleum," I said. "It's a living name." "And names," Nora replied, "can be rebranded." Daniel didn't stop her. He didn't even blink. I set my fork down. The sound it made on the plate was small and precise, like a door closing 2 rooms away. "May I ask something simple?" I said. "If this is about the company's future, why does it require erasing my present?" Nora's shoulders softened, an actress moving into the scene she had rehearsed. "It doesn't erase you. It elevates you. Honorary roles come with visibility, with reverence. You'd be the face. We'd handle the operations." "The face without a voice," I murmured. Claire reached for my hand under the table. I squeezed back before she could lose courage. The conversation moved like a tide, advancing and pulling back, trying to wear down the shore until the land simply surrendered. Nora invoked market trends. Daniel spoke of fiduciary duties. I listened to the words as if they were rain on a window, relentless, patterned, carefully ignoring the person inside the house. "What hurts," I said finally, "is not that you want to modernize. It's that you did not come first to the person who gave this story its beginning." Daniel exhaled. He ran a hand over his face, and for a heartbeat, I saw the boy who used to sleep on Robert's office couch, his school shoes dangling off the edge. "We were trying to protect you, from the ugliness." "I am a widow," I replied. "The ugliness and I are already acquainted." Nora lifted her glass. "To clarity, then." I didn't drink. The rest of dinner unfolded like the second half of a storm. The roast was tender. The green beans were left untouched. The candles burned lower, as if time had decided to sit down at the table with us and take a plate. When we moved to the living room for coffee, Nora wandered the photographs on the mantel, weddings, picnics, desks piled with papers, Robert grinning at a ribbon cutting years before Daniel could spell shareholder. "Beautiful history," she said again, and this time the breeze through the window took the word and made it sound like pity. Emma would have prayed then, for strength, for gentleness. I chose silence. It is astonishing what silence can say when you let it speak. They left earlier than usual. Hugs were exchanged, careful as glass. At the door, Daniel kissed my forehead. "We'll send the final documents tomorrow," he said. "It will be better this way. For everyone." "For whom is everyone precisely?" I asked, but I didn't make him answer. Some questions only deserve to live in the air between you and the truth. When the door closed, the house exhaled. I stood a long time in the foyer, listening to the quiet settle like snow. Then I walked back to the dining room and began to clear the table, one plate at a time, like gathering small witnesses after a crime no one would report. In the kitchen, Clara turned from the sink and took the platter from my hands. "You shouldn't be doing this," she said. "I need the weight of dishes tonight," I answered. "It reminds the hands what they're for." She hesitated, then reached into the pocket of her apron. "This was on the porch bench," she said. "No envelope. I thought it was a recipe or a donation letter, but—" She handed me a single folded page. The paper was thin, cheap, the kind used for flyers. In the center, typed in a font that had no personality, was a sentence. "It was never about your son." No signature, no watermark. Just a sentence like a bruise you didn't realize you had until something pressed it. I read it again. And again. The words shifted from warning to revelation, as if I were turning a gemstone under light. It was never about your son. The company, then? Me? A takeover disguised as a family intervention? Or something more delicate, leverage being applied in the only place I could be broken? Clara watched me the way nurses watch a patient who insists she's fine. "Is it bad news?" she asked. "It's a map," I said. "Or a mirror." I pressed the paper flat on the counter and stared at the shape of the letters until the room blurred. Somewhere outside, a car door shut. Somewhere upstairs, the old floorboard near Robert's study sighed. The house had its own language, and tonight it kept saying, "Look again." I turned the note over. Nothing. I lifted it to the light. No watermark. I ran my finger along the edge and felt a tiny roughness where it had been torn from a stack. Cheap, disposable, meant for speed, not ceremony. In my chest, something that had been curled up for weeks began to uncoil. Not anger, clarity. Clarity knows how to breathe without making a sound. "Clara," I said, "do you remember who delivered the wine?" "Courier," she replied. "Young man, new, didn't look me in the eye." "Did he see the porch?" "He set the box down there while I signed." I nodded. "Would you like me to make tea?" she asked. "Please," I said, and walked to Robert's study. The door was open, as if he'd just stepped out for a moment and would return with a joke about the weather pretending to be important. I sat at his desk and pulled the ledger drawer open, not for numbers, but for the muscle memory of truth. The pen with his initials was still in my purse, but I took out a pencil, quiet, erasable, the opposite of what they wanted from me. On a clean sheet, I wrote the sentence from the note. "It was never about your son." Then, beneath it, the questions arranged themselves. Who benefits if Daniel is in front? Who expects me to retreat? Who stands to control the brand if my vote disappears? Who asked for investor materials before I was told to sign? The pencil left a soft trail like footsteps on dust. I thought of Nora's language: efficiency, modernization, rebranding. I thought of Daniel's: fiduciary duty, safeguarding, majority vote. And I thought of silence, theirs when I asked who had invited the investors, mine when they dressed ambition in careful clothes. The house gifted me one more sound, the grandfather clock in the hall asserting the hour. Time keeps your secrets if you let it, but it also keeps receipts. I folded the note and slipped it into the inside pocket of my cardigan, the one where I used to keep Claire's permission slips and Emma's folded poems for church. I returned to the kitchen for tea. Clara had placed a slice of lemon in the cup. Its scent rose like a small benediction. "Will they be back soon?" she asked. "Yes," I said, because whether they returned to this house or I went to theirs, the conversation wasn't finished. Not when the truth had just written me a line I couldn't ignore. After she went upstairs, I stood alone at the sink, looking out at the small garden Robert had coaxed from stubborn soil. The wind moved through the rosemary like a choir clearing its throat. I pressed my palm against the cool glass of the window and let the quiet reach me. If it wasn't about Daniel, then what had they taken already, or planned to take next? A board seat? A patent? A story? There are things more valuable than money inside a company. Loyalty. Narrative. the choice of what a name means when it goes out into the world. A car passed slowly along the street and paused at our curb, as if reading the house number. Then it rolled on. I watched its taillights dwindle like two red thoughts. The kettle clicked as it cooled. I lifted the note again to the light, searching for something that wasn't there, finding instead the shape of my own reflection on the window, a woman holding a small piece of paper as if it were a compass. I don't know how long I stood there, but when I finally turned off the last light and headed for the stairs, the house felt less like a witness and more like an accomplice. It would keep my secrets. It would hold my silence. And by morning, it would help me listen to every hinge, every footstep, every password-protected file until the map matched the territory. Halfway up, a vibration hummed in my pocket. I took out my phone. A new message from an unknown number. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Boardroom. Bring the pen. Investors are ready. Beneath it, a second message appeared before I could exhale. And Margaret, don't forget the part where you surrender. The lemon in my tea turned bitter on my tongue. I deleted nothing. I saved everything. And somewhere between the last step and my bedroom door, I decided that surrender would not be the story anyone wrote for me. Not even the ones who believed they'd already bought the ending. I lay down, fully dressed, the note in my pocket like a small heat against my side. Sleep did not come, truth did. It arrived without fanfare and sat at the edge of the bed like an old friend, whispering the only sentence that mattered. It was never about your son. And if that was true, then the question was not whether I would sign. The question was, who expected me to forget how to read? The morning began with the sound of rain, not loud but persistent, the kind that rewrites your plans without asking permission. I opened the curtains to find the garden bowed under silver threads of water. The rosemary gleamed dark and defiant. The soil drank in silence. In that gray light, the house looked smaller, like it was holding its breath with me. Maybe it knew. Something had changed. I didn't make breakfast. Instead, I brewed coffee and watched the steam rise, curling like unspoken words. My phone was already on the table, screen lit, messages unread. Each notification from Daniel felt like a heartbeat I didn't trust. I opened the latest email. Subject, board meeting confirmation. Body, 9 a.m. Investors confirmed. Bring finalized documents for signature. Below it, a copied thread. Names I didn't recognize. Foreign investors, consulting firms. Attached, a confidential memorandum labeled Transition Plan, Phase 1. The phrase made me pause. Phase 1, meaning there were others. I clicked. Password protected. Robert had always said that curiosity is the polite name for survival. I searched my drawer for the old flash drive he once gave me, the one shaped like a silver key. Inside, he had stored years of correspondence, back when the company was small and every deal was written like a promise. The password was one of his little jokes. Faith before figures. It still worked. The file opened to a cascade of documents, emails, and spreadsheets. At first, just numbers, boring, deliberate, meaningless to anyone without context. But grief has a way of teaching you how to read between lines. I noticed patterns. Nora's name appearing in email chains she shouldn't have had access to. Meetings labeled informal, but copied to external addresses. Every betrayal starts as a whisper inside a document. I printed one thread and pinned it to Robert's corkboard behind his desk, a small act of resurrection. Paper against cork, proof against memory. Then another, and another. By noon, the board looked like a map of deceit, continents of correspondence connected by thin red strings. The rain outside softened, but the air inside sharpened. I dialed Emma. She answered on the second ring, her voice still wrapped in morning prayer. "Mother, you sound awake too early." "I couldn't sleep," I said. "Has Daniel called?" "Yes, and written, and dictated my next move without realizing I was listening." A pause. Then, gently, "Are you angry?" I'm beyond anger, Emma. I'm studying. She smiled in her tone. Then you're most like Father today. I don't feel like him, I said. I feel like the shadow that used to fall beside him when he spoke the truth. Maybe that's where strength hides, in the shadow before the light. The way she said it reminded me of Robert's old sermons to the children. Truth does not shout, Margaret. It waits until the noise gets tired. When the call ended, I felt steadier. I opened my notebook and began to write questions the way a detective writes prayers. Who first contacted the investors? Why was the memorandum hidden? What does Phase 2 contain? Where are the shares being redirected? I needed a mind calmer than mine, Reverend Whitmore's. The church was quiet, its stone walls exhaling the kind of peace that only exists where pain has learned good manners. I found him near the altar, replacing the candles one by one. Margaret, he said, smiling without surprise. It's always rain when you come with questions. Perhaps I bring the clouds, I said. He gestured toward a pew. Sit. Tell me what burdens the widow today. Ambition, I replied, dressed as progress, spoken through my son's voice. He nodded slowly, as if he'd already met this story in Scripture. And what does it ask of you? My signature, my silence. And what does your conscience answer? That silence is not peace, Reverend. It's complicity. He looked at the flicker of a candle between us. Then speak, but not in anger. Truth delivered in rage is like bread served with ash. I sighed. I don't want revenge. I just want the balance restored, for things to be what they claim to be. That, he said, is justice. And justice, my dear, is God's slow handwriting. His words landed softly, but they steadied me more than I expected. When I left the church, the rain had stopped. The city smelled renewed, though nothing had really changed. Back at the office, the boardroom was empty, yet the air still carried the echo of yesterday's voices. The chairs stood like witnesses in a courtroom awaiting testimony. I sat in Robert's old seat. The leather sighed under me, familiar, forgiving. I opened the company's shared drive, scrolling through files labeled projections, strategies, investor decks. Each folder was tidy, too tidy. Perfection is always suspicious. Then I saw it, Q3 transitional agreements. Inside, a document labeled N-Hale Proposal PDF. Nora's initials. My hands stilled before I clicked. Then I remembered what the Reverend said. Truth waits until noise gets tired. I pressed open. It was all there. Emails from Nora to a third-party investor group dated weeks before the supposed family discussion. She'd negotiated conditional shares, the ones that required my resignation to unlock. The company's future was already traded, priced, packaged, and I was the collateral. The document bore a watermark, confidential, subject to founder's withdrawal. Founder. That was me. I leaned back in the chair, letting the revelation breathe. My pulse was steady, not racing. Calm feels different when it's made of steel. Robert used to say there are two kinds of battles, those fought for victory and those fought for clarity. I had just entered the second. I printed the memorandum and placed it on the desk beside my wedding ring, the symbols of two kinds of covenant, one broken, one enduring. Footsteps sounded outside. Claire. She peered in, hesitant. I called earlier. You didn't answer. I've been reading, I said, sliding the papers slightly under a folder. She walked in, sat across from me, and looked at the wall of pinned documents. Her eyes widened. Mother, what is all this? Truth, I said. The quiet kind. The one people don't want to see until it's stapled to their name. She exhaled. I knew something was wrong. Daniel's been tense for weeks. Nora's been rehearsing calm. She's always calm, I said. That's her camouflage. Claire hesitated, then spoke softly. Are you going to confront them? Not yet, I said. Not with noise, with precision. She smiled faintly. That sounds like you. When she left, I remained at the desk, hands resting on the cool edge as though touching the pulse of the house itself. I drafted an email to Daniel. Subject: Governance proposal, questions before signature. I asked about clauses, voting rights, investor backgrounds. I knew he wouldn't answer truthfully, but questions can be traps too. Gentle snares disguised as innocence. As I wrote, a memory surfaced, Robert teaching Daniel how to balance the checkbook. Every number tells a story, he'd said, and every story needs honesty to hold. I closed my eyes and whispered to the empty room, then let the numbers speak. That night, I took the documents home, tucked between folders labeled personal. Over dinner, I said nothing to Clara, nothing to Emma, who called again to read me a prayer. I listened instead, to the sound of forks, to the ticking clock, to the rhythm of patience gathering strength. After midnight, I went to the study and pinned the memorandum beside the anonymous note. The two papers fluttered in the soft breeze from the open window, whispering to each other like conspirators. It was never about your son, I murmured, rereading the message. No, it was about the door that his love could open. The house was quiet, except for the rain starting again. I could hear the drops tapping the window like impatient witnesses. I took out a notebook and wrote a single sentence. Tomorrow, the truth will attend the meeting too. I didn't know how, not yet, but I knew where to begin. Because some wars don't need trumpets, only evidence, and the calm voice of a woman no longer willing to be signed away. The building wore its seriousness like a pressed suit. Even the elevators spoke in a hush, opening with a sound that asked you to behave. I arrived 10 minutes early and walked the hallway alone, the soles of my shoes keeping time with the morning. Down the glass corridor, I could see the boardroom already set, water glasses in disciplined rows, a carafe that would stay mostly untouched, chairs arranged like jurors who had already read the verdict. I paused at the door and looked at my reflection. Not the widow who needed protecting, not the mother who could be negotiated with. A woman who knew where the truth lived and was ready to knock. Inside, there were nods, polite greetings, thin smiles offered like receipts. Daniel stood when he saw me, a habit he hadn't yet surrendered. Nora did not stand. She glanced at the clock, then at my hands, searching for the pen as if it were a talisman that could bless her plan. "Morning," Daniel said, voice careful. "Thank you for being here." "I'm always where the story requires me," I answered. One by one, the directors took their seats. Some had joined during Robert's years, others after. Their faces were different, but the choreography was the same. Laptops opened, legal pads ready, a quiet jostle for moral distance from whatever this meeting would do to a family. Nora placed a thin folder in front of her and laced her fingers together. "We appreciate everyone's time," she said, warmth in the tone, winter in the eyes. "Today is about stability. Markets respond to clarity." Clarity. She pronounced it like a product launch. Daniel nodded toward me. "We're grateful to my mother for agreeing to a smooth transition. There are investors prepared to—" "Before we do anything smooth," I said gently, "may I ask the secretary to note that I have materials to present for the record?" A small ripple moved across the table. Curiosity, then restraint. The secretary looked at Daniel. He hesitated, then nodded. I placed a single sheet at each seat. The paper touched wood with a soft certainty. "This is a timeline," I said. "Emails, memos, meeting invites, some labeled informal, some confidential. Please take a moment." They read. Eyes narrowed. Someone's pen began to tap, then stopped as if it had embarrassed itself. "These correspondences," I continued, "outline negotiations between our acting operations advisor and an external investor group. The terms propose contingent shares released upon my resignation, coupled with governance changes that remove my deciding vote. The dates," I tapped the header, "precede any family conversation about transition." Daniel's gaze flicked to Nora. A small muscle in his cheek argued with itself. Nora did not blink. Margaret, anyone with initiative explores possibilities. It would have been irresponsible not to prepare options. Preparation is a noble word, I replied. But options built on secrets are not options. They're traps. A director cleared his throat. Mrs. Hale, are you alleging that your removal is a precondition for these investors? I'm not alleging, I said. I'm reading. I lifted a second document. Here is the memorandum labeled Phase 1. It specifies release of preferential shares contingent upon founder withdrawal from deciding authority. I am the founder referenced. The watermark confirms it. The emails show who sent it. I slid the memorandum to the center where everyone could see the watermark breathe under the light. Silence took off its shoes and sat down with us. Daniel leaned forward, voice low. Nora, did you authorize this? Her smile didn't move. I facilitated conversations. Companies require momentum. Did you authorize this? He repeated. She turned her head slightly, letting the quiet emphasize her reasonableness. Daniel, the goal was to stabilize. Your mother has worked tirelessly. No one questions that. But markets favor decisive leadership and streamlined governance. These documents were merely paving the road. By removing my mother from the car, he said. I could see the moment he found the boy inside him, the one who knew the difference between speed and direction. A director with kind eyes looked at me. Mrs. Hale, what outcome do you want today? Only what I have always wanted, I said. A company whose name still means something when it leaves the door, and a board whose power is not purchased with the quiet death of its conscience. I let the sentence rest. Words can do their work if you give them a chair. I handed out the last page, a short list of governance proposals I had drafted at dawn. Independent seats appointed for expertise, not allegiance. A bonus pool tied to shared performance across departments, not just to the victory of those closest to the microphone. Transparency protocols on investor approaches, disclosed to the board and archived for audit within 7 days. Nora tilted her head, pity like perfume. And your role? Active, I said. Measured. Not honorary. I will not be embalmed for display. A few of the directors looked away as if the honesty were too undressed for a weekday morning. Nora opened her folder at last, taking out a single page with the tidy violence of a surgeon. With respect, Margaret, the business cannot run on sentiment. We're in a competitive landscape. The brand is strong but aging. A rebrand under new leadership would... New leadership who has already leveraged undisclosed discussions to dilute founder control, I said, my tone as even as the line of the table, which is both a moral failure and a practical risk. Investors who need secrecy to enter a house rarely intend to live there. A director at the far end nodded slowly, as if a chord had been struck. Another rubbed his temple, then read the timeline again from the top, as though hoping the dates might rearrange themselves. Daniel's voice softened. Mother, why didn't you tell me you had these documents? Because I needed you to hear them, I said. Not from my grief, from their dates. His hand moved toward the papers, then stalled midway, as if the truth were too hot. I stood. Chairs whispered against the floor. I will not raise my voice, I said. I will raise the truth. I gestured to the board. We can modernize. We can invite investment, redesign our reporting, even change the color of the logo if that brings us joy. But we cannot call theft stewardship. We cannot call silencing a woman efficiency. Nora's composure cracked by a hair's breadth. A blink too slow. A breath caught the wrong way. It was small, but the room noticed. She placed her palms on the table. We are wasting time with feelings. No, I said. We are wasting a heritage with shortcuts. The secretary's pen hovered above the minutes, unsure what history required from him. I turned to Daniel. Son, if you want to lead, lead with both eyes open, not through borrowed words, He swallowed. I thought I was protecting us. You were protecting a plan that asked you to love me from a distance, I said. That's not protection. That's exile with better lighting. His shoulders gave an inch. Pride put up its last hand, then stepped aside. A director asked, cautious, Mrs. Hale, do you request a vote? I request the truth to be entered into the record, I said. Then I request we adopt the governance proposals in front of you. If they pass, we begin again without theater. Nora laughed quietly, as if amused by a child's courage. These proposals, this is quaint. Margaret doesn't see what the market requires. And Daniel, you know as well as I do. Stop, he said. The word surprised him as much as it did her. It wasn't loud. It just measured a boundary none of us had seen him draw. Stop, he repeated, more certain. You went ahead without telling me that my mother's consent was the lever. You made her the price of entry. I made space for the company to grow, Nora said, soft and dangerous. At the cost of the woman who built it, he answered. There is a moment in any trial when everyone recognizes which story will be believed. We had arrived. I sat down. My hands were steady. The light through the glass wall fell across the table like a pale ribbon, connecting our faces whether we wanted it to or not. The votes were taken one by one. First, to reject the transition clause that removed my deciding vote. Hands rose. Eyes met mine, then dropped as if this were a prayer. Second, to adopt the independent seats and transparency protocols. A longer pause. Then, hands again. Enough of them, and the secretary finally exhaled in ink. Third, an item I had not asked for. Whether to censure the undisclosed negotiations and audit all investor communications during the last quarter. I didn't move. The board did. It passed. Justice does not always arrive in a robe. Sometimes it wears bifocals and a cautious tie. Nora remained very still, as if stillness could reverse time. Congratulations, she said to no one, to everyone. You have voted for stagnation. We voted for daylight, I replied. Daniel stood abruptly, chair skidding back. He faced the window, spine rigid, hands on his hips. Then the rigidity broke. He turned to me, eyes raw. I'm sorry, he said. I am so... Not here, I whispered. Hold your apology for a place with fewer witnesses. Nora gathered her folder, each gesture exact, the ceremony of retreat. On her way out, she paused beside me. The market doesn't care about your quiet victories, she said, so softly only the two of us could hear. It rewards movement. Then it will notice when ours is forward, I answered. She left without looking back. I stayed while the room emptied, signing what required my signature, protecting what required my presence, refusing what required my vanishing. When the last pen clicked shut, the air loosened. I thanked the secretary, who had the tired look of a man who had watched something both ordinary and holy. In the hallway, Daniel waited. He opened his mouth, closed it again, then put his hand on the wall like he needed the building to hold him up. Tell me what to do, he said. Begin by saying nothing to defend what cannot be defended, I replied. Then choose whether you want a marriage or a co-conspiracy that calls itself by that name. He nodded, a slow, stunned motion. Will you come by tonight? To talk? I'll send Claire, I said. If we speak now, the words will be too hot to hold. He accepted the sentence like the medicine it was. Outside, the city had found its afternoon. People were doing ordinary things again, buying bread, checking watches, arguing with traffic. I let the door of the building close behind me and stood for a moment on the steps, feeling the sky open above my head like a ceiling that had remembered it was not a ceiling at all. In my bag, the pen was heavier than usual, as if the truth had climbed inside to rest. When I reached home, Clara met me with that way she has of seeing without asking. She set tea on the kitchen table and let the steam do the comfort while I reclaimed silence from the day. On the porch bench, a small envelope waited. No stamp, no handwriting on the outside, just the color of consequence. I opened it. A single slip of paper. 5 words, spare and merciless. I never wanted him. The sentence made no sound, but it rearranged the furniture inside my chest. The house around me seemed suddenly too aware. The old clock urgent, the floorboards listening, the distance between rooms a little longer. The note was unsigned. It didn't need a name. The handwriting was neat, controlled. I recognized the slope of certainty. Even kindness has a signature. So does calculation. The wind lifted the edge of the paper as if it wanted to carry the words away. I pressed it flat with my palm and felt, for the first time that day, a tremor in my hand. Daniel's face came to me as he was at 8 years old, asleep on the office couch, a pencil stripe on his cheek, the ledger open under his arm, as if numbers were a storybook that could end with courage. I saw him at 25, refusing to take a vacation because he didn't yet believe the business would survive without his presence. I saw him yesterday, a man trying to sound like a leader while speaking someone else's lines. I never wanted him. If that sentence was true, then love had been traded for leverage long before today's vote. And then the question gathered itself like a storm at the edge of the field. What did she want instead, and what price had the rest of us already paid for the pursuit? I folded the note and slipped it into the pocket where the first warning lived. The 2 papers brushed against each other, like flint. Sparks waited in their silence. I stood in the doorway and looked at the evening light walking softly across the floor. The house felt both emptied and full, emptied of illusion, full of room for whatever would come next. I didn't feel victorious. I felt awake. There would be more meetings. There would be explanations and a new architecture for how we made decisions. There would be nights when my hand reached for the phone and stayed, remembering that not every question deserves the dignity of an answer. But for now, I let the sentence sit with me at the kitchen table, as if it were a guest that had knocked and said a truth too sharp to leave on the porch. I never wanted him. The tea had gone cold. I drank it anyway, because sometimes warmth must come from somewhere other than a cup. Down the hall, Robert's study breathed its familiar air. I went in and opened the window. The night was moving in, not with fanfare, just with the quiet insistence of things that cannot be stopped. I pinned the new note beside the memorandum. The papers fluttered, speaking a language I understood better every hour. Outside, a car slowed at the curb and idled for a moment, then drove on. Somewhere a dog barked, certain of its duty. Somewhere a woman decided to tell the truth to someone who would not want to hear it. I set the pen on the desk and let my fingers rest on it. A tool, nothing more. But in the right hand, a promise. I turned off the lamp, leaving the window open to the evening, and walked back through the house that had learned to hold me. In the passing glass of the hallway mirror, I saw a woman no longer waiting for permission to keep what was hers. And in the reflection behind her, a door just beginning to open. Morning arrived without asking permission. It found the house awake before I was, light moving across the hallway like a hand touching each frame. Weddings, birthdays, a ribbon cut by a man who believed in paper only because he believed first in people. The boardroom waited somewhere across town, but today the table that mattered was here. I set a single sheet of thick paper on the dining table, the same polished surface where last night's note had emptied a room inside my chest. The window was open. The curtains lifted and fell with a gentle certainty, and I let the breeze choose its own pace. Robert used to say that a signature is a wind that can either bend a tree or carry a seed. I chose the second. Before I began to write, I placed my hands flat on the wood. They were steady. Not because I felt certain, but because certainty had finally stopped asking to be consulted. "Clara?" I called softly. She appeared in the doorway, an apron like a flag of truce. "Tea?" "Please, and would you bring me the tin of fountain pen cartridges from Robert's desk? The blue-black ones." "Of course," she said, and left with that kindness that makes silence feel shared. When the pen was filled, I tested it in the margin, the ink drying to the color of ocean at dusk. Then I wrote, not as an executive and not as a widow, but as a woman who had walked through a night and found the door on the other side. My son, there is no courtroom where a mother can appeal the parts of love that went missing. There is only a table, a pen, and the morning. This letter is not an indictment. It is a map you are free to fold into your pocket or forget on the porch bench. I write it here, in the house that raised you, and also made room for your doubts, because truth spoken from any other address would sound like an order. I considered all the ways anger could wear my voice and found none of them worthy of the woman who taught you your first numbers and the man who showed you how to make those numbers mean kindness. You were not born dishonest. You were born busy with proving you could carry what your father carried. I have watched that effort bend you in places where you once moved like light. The world rewarded your effort and forgot to tell you that effort is not the same as purpose. Yesterday, a sentence arrived that tried to break the story we share. It did not succeed. What might be broken is not us. It is the idea that family can be rented to convenience and returned without scratches. That idea is false. If you hear nothing else from me, hear this. Love does not rescue us from truth. It makes us brave enough to live with it. When you come to see me, bring only silence enough to listen. We will start there, because starting is a discipline we forgot in our rush to arrive. Your mother, M. I set the pen down and let the ink dry like a prayer that refuses to be hurried. In the quiet, the letter breathed, and the room, bless it, breathed with me. On the porch, the garden carried on. Rosemary elbowed its way through new growth, the lemon tree lifting small green promises toward a sky that had finally remembered its duty. I folded the letter and placed it in an envelope with Daniel's name, a simple hand, unadorned. The handwriting I used when signing permission slips and notes that said, "Dinner at 7, don't be late." Before sending it, there was work to finish that belonged to the company, not just our house. At the office, the boardroom felt like a place that had washed its face. The secretary greeted me with a nod too tired to be anything but true. I asked him to set time for a short gathering, no speeches, no theater. When everyone had filtered in, I stood with the morning still inside my voice. We agreed to daylight, I said. Let's open every window we have. The proposals were simple to read and difficult to fake. 2 independent chairs, elected for expertise and rotated on a schedule that didn't allow loyalty to tip into ownership. A transparent log for investor outreach reviewed monthly by the entire board. A compensation plan that pulled more weight toward the team. Distribution that recognized the hands that closed the doors and turned on the lights, not only the ones who signed the papers. We called it a shared tide. No one argued with a tide unless they wanted to drown. A director asked about the public narrative, how we would explain the change without performing it for applause or apology. We will say we are doing what we should have been doing all along, I answered, listening to the truth before we ask it to carry our name. When the votes were complete, there was no applause. Good governance does not require applause. It requires repetition. We had work to repeat. After the meeting, I walked the corridor alone and paused at the glass where I had seen a version of myself arrive, uncertain and armed with nothing but a promise. The same woman looked back, older by a week that had demanded a year's worth of courage, and I lifted a hand to her as if we were both learning how to greet the morning. Daniel's office door was ajar. I did not step in. I left the envelope on his desk, beneath the small paperweight he had taken from Robert's things, a glass sphere with a bubble forever reaching for the surface. On the outside of the envelope, I wrote nothing but his name, not a condition, not a threat. Names carry enough weight when you allow them to do their own work. When I reached home, Emma was waiting on the porch steps, her knees drawn up the way she sat when she was a girl listening for thunder. She stood and hugged me with that soft fierceness that made me think of the shoreline, how it accepts every wave and remains. "Did you tell the truth?" she asked. I set it down where it could not be ignored. "And did you keep your peace?" "I let it keep me," I said. We went inside. She placed her hand on the dining chair before she sat, as if asking the wood for permission to witness what would be said here. I told her about the votes, about the policies with names as plain as bread and as strong as fences. I told her about leaving the letter. Emma smiled like the sun finding a window. "He will read it," she said. "Soon?" I asked. "I didn't say soon," she replied, and in that pause was a kindness I hadn't known I needed. In the afternoon, I walked through Robert's study and opened the ledger drawer again, no longer seeking the past for proof, but to give it a place to rest. The printed memorandum hung beside the two notes, and together they felt less like weapons and more like artifacts that had already lost their power. I did not remove them. History deserves a shelf even after it surrenders its job. Claire arrived later, holding a bag of oranges and something tender in her expression that reminded me of new laws written in private. She listened. She asked questions where silence would have been easier. She joked once, gently, to let the room exhale. Then she stepped close and whispered, "Do you want me there tonight if he comes?" "Yes," I said. "But also no. If he is going to look at me, he needs to see only me. We'll need you later, when the ground starts to wobble." She understood and left the oranges on the counter as if they were a small sun we could peel when the day needed proof of sweetness. Dusk arrived like a letter without a name. The house accepted it. Lamps were turned on in corners that had learned we do not chase the dark. We give it edges. I waited in the living room with a book open on my lap and my mind open where the book could not reach. When the knock came, it sounded ordinary, as if anyone could have been on the other side. Daniel stood with his hands empty. He looked taller and then shorter in the same minute, like a boy being punished by the scales of himself. "I got your letter," he said. "Then come in and sit where letters come to rest," I replied. He closed the door carefully, as if the hinges were listening. We sat. For a moment, he studied the grain of the table, then raised his eyes. Time, which had been a stranger in our house for months, pulled up a chair. "I won't ask you to excuse me," he said. "I won't ask you to forget. I'll just say that I wanted to be the kind of man who could carry a thing without breaking it. Somewhere along the way, I started measuring weight instead of worth." "I know the shape of that confusion," I said. "It is almost honorable until it is not." He nodded, throat tight with the ordinary agony of telling the truth. "I thought she wanted me," he confessed, and the sentence did not make him smaller. It made him human. "But I think she wanted the door I could open. That's not her fault alone. I opened it." "Then close it with dignity," I said, "not by slamming it, by choosing a door that also opens back to you." He breathed out, a sound that had more years in it than our conversation did. "Is there room for me here? In this company? In this house?" "There is room for anyone who knows the difference between a promise and a plan," I answered, "and the difference between a vote and a voice." We did not solve it that evening. Solutions pretend to be neat. We did something harder. We agreed to stay with the questions until they learned our names. He left with the envelope back in his pocket, not because he needed proof I had written it, but because he wanted something to touch when the noise tried to teach him how to forget. After he was gone, the house did what houses do best. It held the echo and gave it a place to fade. The lemon peel on the counter glowed oddly gold, a moon small enough to lift. I washed the cups and looked out at the garden. The night had settled. A quiet wind reset the rosemary. The world was rehearsing the act of being forgiven. The next morning, I returned to the table where the story began, a pen resting beside a document that no longer needed my surrender. The window was open, the light was clean. I did not sign away my deciding vote. Instead, I signed the policy that made it unnecessary to protect myself with heroics again. The ink dried quickly, as if it had been waiting for this particular shape of my name. Clara brought fresh bread for breakfast. We ate without performance, the simplest victory of all. Emma stopped by with verse scribbled on the back of a grocery receipt. Claire texted to ask whether the oranges should be turned into marmalade or simply eaten, whole and laughing. I said we should eat them because not every sweetness needs preservation to prove it mattered. Before noon, I went to the study and opened the window wider. The papers on the board lifted and settled, and I understood at last why I had left them there. Not as trophies, not as warnings, simply as reminders that the truth had stairs, and we had climbed enough of them to see over a wall. Sometimes the reward for not surrendering is not applause. It is the sound of your own breathing, choosing its own pace. It is the way your hands sit quietly on a table without asking the wood for permission. It is the light you didn't invite that entered anyway and asked, politely, if you were ready to begin. The table is the same. The room is the same. Even the clock is the same, though I swear it leans a little now, respectful, reconciled to our unhurried time. Only one thing is different. When I look at the pen, I do not see a threat. I see a tool that can say yes to the life that remains. Outside, a car passes and doesn't slow. Somewhere, papers shuffle in other rooms where families are learning the old lesson the modern world keeps rephrasing, that love and power do not speak the same language, and that sometimes the bravest action is to make them translate. The window stays open. The morning does not leave. And on the table, the name we built keeps breathing. Sometimes silence feels like the only refuge. But tonight, I realize silence can also be a choice, and a dangerous one. I wonder what you would have done in my place. Would you have signed? Stayed? Fought? Tell me, what did you think of this chapter? What would you have done if the truth demanded your voice? Because in the end, every story belongs to the one who dares to tell it. I am Margaret Hale, and this was only one part of what they call a transition. But peace, peace, always comes with a price. And in the next episode, I'll discover how much it truly costs when the name written on the receipt is my daughter's. Don't miss the next chapter. My daughter said she wanted peace. Subscribe, follow, and stay with me, because the truth hasn't finished speaking yet.